1, 2, 3.
Welcome to Scealta. My name is Joe Austin. If you've just joined Scealta for the first time, let me explain to you that Scealta is a joint production of Fáilte Fears to Hear and Feile and Fumble. And if you look at the advertisements about Feile, you'll see that we boast that we talk to the interesting, the educated, but the never boring. And my guest this evening fits completely in that category. So it's Maire Thompson. How are you? Are you well? So for anybody that doesn't know, you're currently the principal of Hazelwood Integrated Education College. But there's much more to you than that, of course. You are obviously a wife to care on. You are a mother of 2. And I was amazed to discover that you have 6 sisters.
6 sisters altogether.
But you were deemed either to be a prison warder or a teacher. There was nothing else for you, like we're 6 sisters.
Do you know what? I feel really lucky having grown up with 6 sisters, because they're all special in very different ways, and you can go to them for very different things. And I probably feel sorry for Anya. She's the oldest, and Anya studied psychology at Trinity, and therefore she gets tortured. Any problems, we all put her up or go down for a weekend. So she's the oldest and deemed probably the wisest. I don't know about the street wisest, but definitely the wisest.
Well, let me just tell you, and we'll get this out of the road at the beginning of the program. We have a very extensive research department here, but we recruited 2 professionals when we were trying to get some background on you. So you're on Colette. You can blame her for any of the embarrassing questions, and your former next door neighbour, Terry O'Hare. So those 2 collaborated, and they give us wee bits and pieces of information. Now, I have to say, they give us nothing that would embarrass you, but they give us information. So at the end of this, and when you see it, if you want to blame anybody, blame them too. I've watched and I've read interviews that you've given over a number of years, and I have to say that you make it look very easy, and you make your job look very easy. You bat off your talents, whether it be in basketball or whether it be in the theatre of education and the awards that you've given. When you delve a wee bit deeper, your life, I suppose, it didn't start off very easy. It didn't start off with a kind of a ready-made Hollywood success story. And if you don't mind, could you tell us just a wee bit about that?
When I was 6 weeks, my biological father, Eamon, was killed in a car crash just at Kennedy Way. And my older sister Anya, I think Anya was just over a year. So unfortunately, I didn't have very much time with him, and only really know information about him, I suppose, based on folklore and people telling me that. My mummy then was left, obviously, with Anya and I, and I'm sure that was traumatic for her, but she was lucky. She had good family and she had good friends around her. And then unfortunately, a few years later, she was diagnosed with cancer. But in between that stage, she met a gentleman called Maire Thompson, who for me and Anya and the rest of the girls, he became our father. In fact, my husband would say we have a very unhealthy outlook of him, because we just idolised him, because my mummy then, a few years later, died of cancer. And he went to court. He formally adopted Anya and I, and along with my Aunt Clette, who nursed my mummy when she was dying, and then looked after us. We were, I suppose, exposed then to a lot of different people who fell in behind him and felt, with the tragedy of both sort of biological parents having died, that they would help my daddy in terms of giving us the best opportunities and supporting him, because it was very difficult. I mean, I probably didn't recognise the trauma of that until I had my own children. During that time, Anya would say to me, or my oldest sister, she mothered me quite a bit, and I always felt sorry for me. Aunt Clette would say, when I get into trouble, Anya would be like, "Oh, please don't be saying that, Maire." And she would be in, and it feels as if she's always been there doing that in the background as I've grown up. But when that happened, I suppose we had so many people around us, and I became immersed in sport when I got older, that I didn't, I suppose, recognise the adversity in that, or the travesty in that, until I progressed through life. And as I say, Anya went on to be a counselling psychologist and had went through therapy in her life, and she used to say to me, oh, you know, you're going to have to talk to somebody about that in years to come. And I'd be like, Anya, behave, you know. But then when I did have my own children, some of that did come back, and that sort of longing and loss of not having your mother. Just to quickly finish the story. So my father, Harry, then reared the two of us. We went to live in Galway, in Salt Hill. We went to a school in Salt Hill called Taylor's Hill. And we stayed there for a few years, and my daddy met a lovely woman called Catherine Lydon, and he married again. And I suppose that was difficult because it had just been the three of us, and then came along Kathy and five more sisters. And I think for me, as I've grown up in life, had we not had those experiences, I think our life would have been it has been very enriched. And my daddy was like, listen, I have 7 girls. There's no half sisters. There's none of that in here. And Kathy, God love her, came to Belfast, had the 5 girls, had Anya and I. And we were very lucky to have, I suppose, that enriching experience of having all those people in our lives, which would have been very lonely if it was just me and my daddy and I suppose Anya. And of course, my Aunt Clette has always been in the background for the highs and the lows. She got tortured.
Well, this is one of those rare occasions. Normally I interview people who I know of, but I don't know, and I don't know a lot of their background and their family background. And I'm very fortunate, and I mean I'm very fortunate, that the people that you talk about your pillars, and there are many of them, but some of those you talk about your pillars, your Aunt Colette, your biological father, Amy, your mother, and Harry, I knew them all. And I knew them all in different phases of my life. You know, I remember your mother, I lived in North Belfast where she came from. And I remember your mother coming to my home, and she was a special person. And I'm not saying that because we're speaking, but she was a special person. I listened to you talking in one of your interviews, and you talked about that your education, you know, was influenced very much by a teacher who didn't actually teach you, but who you took to and who you, it sounds like on a previous life you were stalking her, but I mean, that wasn't, of course, but was her influence as a teacher, did that go any way to have you end up a teacher?
Yes, we came back from Galway and I went to St. Louise's, and I met a teacher there who was the basketball teacher, a teacher called Deirdre O'Connor. And I still torture and say, Deirdre, I'm blaming you for this. And she took the basketball club, and I used to go regularly, and she was lovely, but she also took cross-community stuff back then. So we went away with Derrimore School. We went down to Dungannon. I just went on so many trips with her. And even though she didn't teach me formally in a classroom setting, she very heavily influenced me around trying to get me into sport. And she had said to me, look, there's a club outside of the basketball club that you attend in school here. It's not my club. She had played with Queens. She said, it's a club called Sport in Belfast. She said, I think it's the best club in Belfast. I think you should go. And they were training at the time in Maysfield Leisure Centre. So I remember getting a taxi down into the town and walking across. And I was very heavily influenced by Deirdre, and we remained friends. And funny, going back to teaching, Deirdre then came to my wedding. And when I first qualified as a teacher, I went and taught back in St. Louise's first and foremost. And one of the students in my class, in my very first PE class, was Jane Adams. And we became friends. And Jane was at the wedding. So it was like a circle of friends and friends connected through teaching and positivity. But I started to go to Maysfield Leisure Centre, and I met a coach. So there was a gentleman there called Barney Ball. He was a coach. And Barney was from Bangor, and his wife, Rosie. They were just really decent people, Joe, and they were there, and there was a group of ladies there who played on the team. They were all older. I was like the youngest there at that time because it wasn't as popular. And I just went, and I really liked it. And I just kept going back. And then we started playing throughout Ireland. We were playing in Cork, we were playing in Dublin, We were playing, mostly we were the only team from the north, so we were always traveling down south. And so from I was 16, I got to go there. One of the girls in the team, a girl called Deirdre Brennan, so she's actually Professor Deirdre Brennan, but I never call her Professor, she laughs. She kept saying to me, you know, you need to go to Jordanstown, you love PE, and I think you'd be a great PE teacher. So that sort of group of people used to bring me as well. Like, there's a funny story, Deirdre remember, she said, bringing me back from a match down south, and we were coming down, as our kids call the Mona bypass. So we were flying down the Mona bypass, and there was a stolen car coming at us. And she said, she was like, well, there's a car coming. And I was going, it's all right, keep to the side, getting on like that, you'll be fine. And she says, to this day, she says she just remembers being totally shocked. And I was like, behave, come on. And they would, in the middle of the troubles, drive me to wherever we needed to go. And back at the time we were living in Scealta, drop me back from the session. They were just very, very good to me. And I remember one time, I suppose you get 16, 17, you have other external influence as well. And I remember Deirdre saying to me, you know, you need to be very careful, Maura. There are two paths and you don't need to be going down the wrong path, and you need to be, because I was lively, I was never cheeky, but just lively and I suppose mischievous. I like fun. I like to enjoy myself. So Deirdre then and Barney, they sat me down and they were saying, look, you need to go to the university. But then one of my big barriers, and I suppose this is what makes me relate to a lot of young people, is I couldn't get my GCSE maths. I failed it like 4 times. But Daddy got a tutor in. The tutor told him he was wasting his money because I was going to basketball, coming back and then falling asleep. The guy was teaching me maths and I was like, sorry. And my daddy was like, you're never getting a degree in basketball, more. And I asked, he's trying to tell you your mathematics. So it was funny, but it wasn't funny. And I kept feeling it. So then I went on to do my A-levels. And this always stays with me. I always think how you speak to children, and that old phrase, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. But I remember a teacher who remained nameless saying to me, I was applying for Jordanstown, she didn't know me, or University of Ulster. She just knew me from being, I suppose, lively and playing basketball. And I said, I need such and such to get in. And she said to me, do you not think that's a bit ambitious for you? And that stayed with me to that. Now, that wouldn't have been representative of the other 90% of our staff, or 99%, but that stayed with me. It's funny, the negative stuff stays with you. And when I did the A-levels, I got a job in the White Rock Leisure Centre as like sports for all leader or something. And I think I didn't get enough to get into Jordanstown. I just missed it. And the basketball ones were saying, well, you have to keep emailing them and you have to keep torturing them, and you have to, if you don't get in this time, you have to get in next time. So started in the leisure centre, and then I think 3 or 4 weeks into the job in the leisure centre, somebody dropped out and I got a phone call and they said, right, you're in. I was like, yeah. I was like, no. I was looking going, does that mean university? I was like, yes, get into university.
Can I bring you back a wee bit, because I'm interested in this, and I spoke to someone, and it wasn't your Aunt Colette, but I spoke to someone about your kind of, because I'd done all the research, I'd watched the videos, I'd read the Belfast Telegraph articles, and I'd done all of that. And I said to someone, tell me, what is she like? Is it, you know, apart from the fact that she's academically very bright and she's a star basketball player and she played for Ireland and she played for Commonwealth and all of, but what is she like? And I said, she's very determined. You know, if she thinks that something is worthwhile doing, she's very determined. And she's also very, and so it was a phrase that I came on, and I'll give you the example, and then I'll give you the phrase. She's also very very group orientated. And one of the things that I came across during the interviews was your assessment up in Ruralbagh village. And I want to return to that. But and you mentioned Jane Addams, who I've also had the pleasure of interviewing. That determination, which I'm told you have, right? Does it come from sport, or was it added to by the sport? Because you just didn't play basketball. You were a superb player. You were well above average.
I think it comes from the sport, but I also think it comes from having to cope with adversity in your life, you know. And for me, it's always been about you know, proving people wrong. I hate people pigeonholing where you're from or your circumstances or what's happened to you, and particularly even with the children that I meet. And I think when you go for a job, nobody ever says, how hard was your life? That's the first question. I tell kids that. But I also think, you know, I would hate to be a statistic, and I would hate children that I teach to be a statistic that people talk about around free schooling backgrounds, coming from social deprivation. I believe that, you know, where you're from doesn't define you, and that your parents and, you know, the people around you can have very positive influences in making life-changing an impact. And that doesn't have to be university. That can be, you know, there was a guy up doing my gas the other day and left school when he was 16, running a fabulous business. And I was so proud of him. So it does, and he's had a wee bit of adversity. So I think it's the adversity, it's also the basketball and the people around you. And I think sport is, both my children had been heavily involved in sport, and I'm still involved in sport myself. I just finished, actually a few years ago, was still coaching the Ulster under-19 team, but now I'm doing a wee bit with Gort. But I think sport is a great leveler. It teaches you how to lose, how to win, how to be gracious. And one of the most important things I think it teaches you is humility, you know, because you could be high and doing really well one game or in one particular aspect, and then all of a sudden you could lose to a better player, to a better team. And you have to be able to take that. And that can be very, like, we've had some tough losses in sport, and I can see that my daughter played for the Antrim team, and they got through to the All-Ireland first girls team from Antrim to get through to win the Ulster A, and they got through to the All-Ireland. And she cried the whole way home. They lost in the All-Ireland semi-final, and she cried. But in my mind, I was thinking, that's why they say sports character building, because it is. It helps you cope with things that maybe you wouldn't have the previous experiences to dip into, to be able to use when a challenge comes your way. And funny, when we were talking about this pandemic, a friend of mine was telling me there was an article in the Times, and they were giving out about children and saying, oh, it's the snowflake generation and they can't do this and they can't do that. And the children were saying, but no, you have life experiences to dip in to get you through whatever's going on. We haven't had those life experiences yet. So how can you expect us to go back and into experiences that we've never had? So the sport, most definitely, I'd probably say maybe 60%, but also the 40% in the determination around, I think, my personal circumstances. And my daddy kept saying to us, you know, I think he was afraid with my mummy dad, he was afraid to let, you know, he had promised her we would be all right, and he was afraid that he would let her down if we didn't not necessarily do well. Well didn't constitute university. It constituted being happy, but being educated. He was very much about making sure that you got your education and the importance of that as a passport to take you wherever that you needed to be. So I think the family life, definitely the basketball, and then I suppose the wee bit of adversity.
It's funny you're saying, and some of the phraseology they just used there is similar to what Jane had said when she talked about she was able to call on her own training, her own determination that she got through sport, and she was obviously an excellent sports person, but that when she hit that bump in the road, which we all hit, that she was able to draw mental and physical strength from the fact of her training and how she had done and all of that. So, I mean, your terminology is very, 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 very simple. I asked someone who, this may surprise you, I asked someone who taught with you, because as I said, I'd listened to some of the interviews, and I knew that you had struggled with maths, which is a wee bit strange for a headmistress and an award-winning headmistress. And she said that this was in St. Louise's, and she said she had the unusual talent of identifying with the kids that didn't do well and not identifying with the kids who were successful. And I asked them, what does that mean? And they said, well, it's very easy to love your children when they're passing exams. It's harder to love them when they're handcuffed to a police officer. And do you think that we can't be good at everything, obviously, but do you think that kind of struggling with maths, did it give you that sense of that extra made within your teaching career?
Yes, the bottom line is if I hadn't have passed the maths, which was the fourth time and the last time I was undertaking my A-levels, I wouldn't have been at university because it was a prerequisite for entry. And, you know, it's taught me about resilience. It's taught me about perseverance. It's taught me a lot of things around, like I say to the children that struggle with maths, for me in this society and in terms of education, maths is still the biggest barrier to many children, particularly many disadvantaged children. And it's the hardest thing to pass. And the learning for me in relation to maths is that there's no easy way out. There's no shortcut. There's no, I've tried them, I've tried this. There's no way that you can do it without putting the work in. So I always say to the children, what it's taught me is sometimes whether you don't like something, you just got to get stuck in and do it. And you've got to put probably an additional amount of work in to be able to pass it. And funny, what I do think is because of that experience, so my A levels were just average. And then when I went to university, I finished with the first. So I'd failed my maths 4 times. And if you had looked at me when you were 17 and 18, you wouldn't have said, because in our class at the time, 70% would have been grammar school students that had went to university and they'd all get A's and whatever in their A levels. And it was a very competitive course to get into, but none of that mattered because it was about finding your, I suppose, your niche, the thing that you liked, and then also using that determination and that previous experience to push you forward. And I think there's something around being determined, but also not being arrogant around it. Like for me, if I got a first, that was brilliant. If I didn't get first, I didn't get first. Like I wasn't sitting every night going, I need to be studying, I need to be studying. And funny, at the time, this is so funny, my daddy went to the graduation. He was really, really delighted with it and said, I'm very proud of you. And years later, Arneve, my other sister, did really well. And I think she got a 2-1 or something. And my daddy was very funny. And he was like, and there's Arneve, the best results in the house. And our Anya says, Daddy, I'm where I got a first. And he went, did you? And he was like, Daddy, yes. So like, he understood it, but at the time he just was like, you know what, as long as you're happy and you get your education, that's the most important thing.
You mentioned Gabrielle there, and this may sound a wee bit strange. You're mad about her, and from everybody I've spoken to have said, Harry Jr., your son, is Harry at university, I think?
Harry, funny. And I don't know if it's a parent thing. Gabrielle would say that mothers and their sons, that Harry's the soft spot. But Harry's just started Queen's and is struggling with the whole online thing. But he's a real passion around, he just started a wee dog training business. So he's a real passion around dogs. We've 8 dogs. And nothing to do with me.
8 dogs and 6 sisters. Is there something wrong with your head?
It's my husband. My husband is a great.
I hear he's a saint, by the way.
No. He's I think the phrase might have been not sane as opposed to a saint. He's a great ability to appear calm in front of other people that don't know him. And then his lifelong friends would say, does that girl not know what she married? Does she realise? And I'm like, well, I've been with him. It took me, let me think, I think at 16 years before we got married. So it took me that long to decide, to recognise what I was getting. So, Harry's very like his daddy. He'd be quiet. But again, he played a lot of sport, played for St Oliver Plunkett and then boxed for Holy Trinity, which again takes me back to the theme of sport. I have tried to heavily immerse him in sport, although none of the 2 of them would go to basketball. But when you do that, there's something very family orientated, and there's something again about the village and those group of people there. Like when I go to Gabrielle, who plays for Gort and Mona, when I go there, I'm in awe at the people and the coaches that give their time, and don't just give their time, once a week or whatever. It's like a life mission. It's so much more collegial. It's so much more family orientated than that. And I think the experiences that both of my children have received through sport have allowed them to become better people.
You have an involvement with Gort and Mona yourself. I think you're the COVID officer. Is that right? What does that entail? It sounds horrible.
Joe, it is horrible. And they come up to see me and said, we'll ask Maire to do it. She's a principal. She's probably doing it in the school anyway. And lo and behold, the first COVID case happened in Antrim. And where did it happen? Only Mona. And I was like, I was going to them, how did I say I would do this? And we ended up having to close the club at that stage for 2 weeks. But I suppose for me, I was so grateful in terms of what my daughter had obtained from the club. I mean, they won the Feile last year. There's a load of them play for Antrim. They take them everywhere. And you couldn't say no, and it wasn't a massive. It just means you're looking over the policy and the strategies around COVID and make sure they're adhering to it and working with. You're never doing anything on your own anyway. You're working with a group of people who run the club. But it was funny. And Kieran was going to me, only you, Maire, that's you. So they slag me in the house and call me big COVID officer.
You mentioned Kieran, or I mentioned Kieran being a saint, and of course, no man can be a saint. Well, maybe with exceptions of Harry, but no other man can be a saint. So, where did you meet?
We met. Oh, this is funny. We met. He's a friend called Frastone, and we met at an event in the Trinity Lodge where my daddy phoned at the time. Kieran was university over in. He was finished his social work degree, went back as a mature student, so he was over in England. And I was home in West Belfast. And funny, I normally wouldn't be. I had a flat in Rugby Court. Just behind Botanic, just beside the Queen's PC. So I had lived there and still was living there for 10 years when I met Kieran. And he's the complete opposite to me. Like you're talking about that award. I took on you to the award ceremony. It was on the TV. We were coming out of the green room. The girl says, you're going to have to go back in. It was the girl from Strictly Come Dancing. I didn't know who she was. But anyway, I was coming back in and I phoned Kieran. I said, Kieran, I won that award. And he went, did you? Aye, here's me. I said, oh, I did all right. He said, sure, I'll see you when you get home. And like, he's just totally laid back, is not enamored by the whole teaching thing, and has a very good, I suppose, wise perspective, which is why I think we get on so well. He's very grounded.
And are we to blame him on the dogs? Is he the dog fanatic? Or are you both? I don't know why you heard that question. I'm saying, is Kieran the dog fanatic, or are you both the dog fanatics?
I don't know what happened there. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clear, yeah. Are you not hearing me?
I was going a wee bit fuzzy there for a minute.
The question I was asking you was, are you both dog fanatics, or is Kieran the dog fanatic? More Kieran, but I don't really have a choice. And the kids as well, Kieran and Harry. And he's one for, like, with a big giant Rottweiler called Bernard, and Kieran was working and found him tied up, and somebody was cruel to him, and he was only a pup when we brought him home. And I was like, Kieran. Then another time, so he's very much up for a soft story, and I have to say to him, listen, enough. You live on the outskirts of Belfast. You live in the mountainside, through choice. Yeah.
Years ago, I'd always wanted to live on the mountain up in Hamilton, and we built a house about 15 years ago. It's become really popular now with the mountain walks, so it's just past that. But I think we're both in fairly stressful, intense jobs at times. I mean, Kieran's a residential social worker in a home. So if I come home talking about how tough my day is, his day is a wee bit more intense. So we tend not to do that. But I like to just shut my gate. And although I'm very sociable and I'm chatting to you, and I'm odd, like I like to go home on a Friday, shut my gate and just stay at home and walk the mountain or chill or take it easy. I wouldn't be a great, I suppose maybe I'm just getting old, but I like to just come home and de-stress and away from it all, because you're saying I'm very calm on my job, but sometimes, in that the school I'm in at the minute, we have 1,100 kids. So sometimes, you're exposed to some very integral parts of people's lives, and at times some of it is tough. Just like I'm saying, my own parents die, so you have death, you have potential safeguarding issues, all that. So sometimes it's nice just to get away from it all.
let me just take you back to the teaching end of it, and I want to return to the mountainside, because I know you're passionate about the protection of the mountain, and the mountain's an asset for us all. And like anything that's open to the masses, it can be abused or mismanaged. Maybe that's a better word. You left St. Louise's to go to, where did you go to after that? Was that to Malone?
I left St. Louise's and went to Malone College, and I was there for, I think, 19 years in Malone. And I don't know what it was. And I was thinking about integrated education. My first experience of any type of integration was going on a cross-community trip when I was 16 to Dallas with the girl from the Shankill for 6 weeks. And about a month ago, the people, so I haven't heard from them in 33 years. And the people that I stayed with contacted me via the school. So a job came up Malone, didn't know very much about it. I had itchy feet. I liked St. Louise's. What I would say is that I think that, integrated education is a wee bit more progressive. And I felt that it might have suited my, I suppose, style. And I always felt, which was nothing to do with the people there, but I always felt that it was a past people in St. Louise's. So I'd gone there, then I got a job there. And I just thought it was very important in terms of my own professional development to go somewhere else to be me, not to be more who was a past people.
You tell a great story, and I hope you'll tell it again for us, that shortly into the job, it's like any job, or like most jobs, you go into it and then you realize, and then you wake up some night and you go, why did I take this job on? This is a bigger nightmare than I thought it was. This is going to be, and you visited Harry's grave. So tell, if you don't mind, tell us that story, would you?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think taking that job has given me a wee bit of humility. I had worked at St. Mary's, was doing a bit of a research post, and I thought I'm ready to move it at Chief Feet. And the post came up, and I genuinely didn't think that I would get the principal post. I was on the leadership team, so normally you would go senior leadership team, vice principal, and principal. I had my principal qualifications, but I just put it in, and I thought it would be a good experience for me. And I went home, and on the day that I got the job, I was up the mountain, and they phoned me to say I got it. And then when I put the phone down, I just kept saying, oh my God, I feel sick. And our Gabrielle was saying, Mummy, what's wrong? Who's dead? And I was going, I got a job. I was just in shock. I genuinely was in shock. And I phoned here and I said, can I get that job? He was, that's great. I'm down the fields here. I'll see you in an hour. And like, there's no sort of excitement or no, he's quite chilled. And he was like, because he probably knew if he'd have bought into me being dramatic, that I probably would have. He'd probably had 3 weeks of, what do you think about this job? What do you think? Whatever. So he just was like, right, okay. So I didn't realize, I mean, I knew there were definitely challenges in the job. There had been some challenges financially. There were challenges, I suppose, at that time, it had one of the poorest outcomes in terms of A levels and GCSEs. And I remember when it was, I think it was in January, I was only in the post, it had been inspected. And then in February, I remember my PA coming in and I said to her, how many have applied? And she said, you mightn't want to hear this. And I didn't know what she meant by I might want to. 33 people had applied to go to the school that year when I had taken over. I just cried. I thought, oh my God. And there was just so much going on. That said, the staff were brilliant. There were great people there. There was a passion there, all of that. But I was really in over my head. Like, there was no doubt about it. We had a chair of governors, very experienced, who was fabulous, and a good team to support me. But it just it just was a bit of a nightmare. And I had nowhere to go. I said to Kieran, how do I get out of this? And he says, well, you can't. He says, but you have to follow it through. Just see it as maybe problem solving. So I was really stressed. And how do you say, you can't tell the staff because you don't want them to know, the challenges are there. There was also challenges financially that nobody knew about that I couldn't tell people. So it was just all over. And I went down to my daddy's grave, and I was there and I said, Daddy, you're supposed to be helping me. You're here. I'm up at that school. I'm out of my depth. There's nobody there with me. I'm freaking cramming outside here. And as if he was going to say, more love, I'll be up to see you. And then I phoned our Anya and I was like, Anya, I was down at Daddy's grave telling her, and she's like, what? More, what? And I said, well, just because you live in Carlingford and don't go down. And I wouldn't be one for going to the grave quite often, but I just felt overwhelmed, and I needed that closeness. I just needed to be beside him for him to know that I wasn't struggling. So that was like on a Monday, and this is no joke. We had put in then for a sports hall. So the school was in a challenging position. We put in for a sports hall, and on, I think it was a Thursday or Friday, I had received this letter from the Department of Education securing the sports hall and the funding for the sports hall, which was very significant because the school was doing well. That decision would have ensured its sustainability. So as soon as I got the email, I was like, I feel sick. That was my knowledge. Get the grave. I'm sure people are thinking she is not wise. And when I phoned Anya, I was like, Anya, we just got that money, and I was down at that grave. And our Anya was laughing, like she was saying, she knows what I'm like, and she was just like, Maura, yes, could be that coincidental. Bit of serendipity, bit of everything, but sure, isn't it great news? Don't be dwelling on it, because then I didn't want to dwell on it. I was thinking, I'm going to dwell on that. Was that my daddy or whatever? But it was just, I think it was a comfort thing. And I think that whole experience in Malone, then after, a year or two, the school started to do well. The results were then in the higher quartile. The numbers went up. It was meeting all its number requirements. It was meeting all of its academic requirements and more. Two of the staff went on to be inspectors. It was used for best practice. So the staff were fabulous and really worked through that and came out the other end. So it did turn out well, but it taught me a lot about myself and about leadership and about, not knowing what you don't know. And in this new job, obviously it's a bigger job. There's 1,100 students and 200 staff. I'm not afraid to say, I don't know that. I'm not sure. I'll find out for you. Or I'm not afraid to say to the two, we have two vice principals who are fabulous, and we have a great relationship. And I'm not afraid to say, oh my God, that was a wee bit overwhelming today. This is just all come out. Or to be myself, or to admit that I'm not coping, or that I'm not perfect, or that I have a persona where, like that Lego thing, everything is awesome. Because I think if you can't show your faults, and if you can't show your vulnerabilities, it's very difficult for people to like you and to empathize with you. And I just think, what's the point in trying to be somebody that you're not?
It's important now, just for clarity, when you talk about Malone getting back on its feet, it just didn't get back on its feet. It ended up, you got I think 2017, the head teacher of the UK award, which is a very prestigious award, and there are thousands of head teachers in it, which gave the school that identity. It made the school, your success made the school part of that success. That's what I'm trying to get at. Did you find integrated education much different from what you had been familiar with in St. Louise's?
Yes. Yes and no. No, in the sense that I'd already been exposed to quite a lot of integration through sport. But yes, in the sense that, I do think some of the maintained sectors are a wee bit more rigid. So, for example, when you talk about integrated education, people automatically assume, right, we're talking about Catholic and Protestants, and that's it. And there's so much more to it. I mean, the principles of integrated education are around social responsibility and also around equity. So, for example, and equality. So, for example, in my current school, we have a gay, straight, whatever group. So you can be gay, straight, transsexual, nothing, and those things are normal, and those things are okay. And there's and that's what staff and students, that group's made up of staff and students. So there's a very inclusive approach to that. And I think it allows you to be a wee bit more progressive. I think the integrated sector allows you, but like the Irish sector, but it allows you to take risks. So for example, in the school that I teach in at the minute, we have mixed ability classes. And quite a lot of schools, I think St. Louise have moved towards it, but quite a lot of schools don't do that. And this is a bit of, for me, this is really important, because if you don't have mixed ability, what it means is you have a top class, you have middle classes, and you have bottom classes. And I just think people learn at a different pace, and they become familiar with different concepts at different ages. And I don't like the concept of having stupid classes, I'm sorry, but having these lower perceived ability. I think your talents are somewhere, And if you're in a mixed ability, so this year we've mixed ability, and we've mixed ability teaching in our English department. And I think something like 76% of our students got their English GCSE through mixed ability teaching. So for me, that shows that it can be successful. And it's the same across the school. I just believe that the integrated movement allows you to weave in different concepts. And so, for example, in the school that I'm in at the minute, we're the only school with social workers. And they're on-site social workers. They've been able to do home visits, to be able to do a lot of stuff around one-to-one intervention stuff, to be able to do anxiety. It allows, our governors allow you to take a wee bit of a risk around. Now, obviously, you have to demonstrate impact and evidence that will show that it's making a significant difference. But they're open to things around equity and equality, and based, obviously, if it's based on evidence-based research, I would always say, right, this is what the evidence is telling us now. And not everything can be contextualized to your own school. But I just feel there's a wee bit more give in it. I like working with children. I don't care what their background is. I'm not concerned about that. For me, the barriers around disadvantage and poverty are more important than their politics, and me helping them out of those things and providing an education that's really going to get them to where they need to be. It can be challenging at times. Funny that there was an event when there's an event on last year or the year before, and I think John Finucane and Nigel Dodds, both North Belfast, both our politicians, the election was on, and I just felt the election was getting a wee bit, it was on the news quite a bit, and we had a group of students going to a cross-community event, and I said to them, now guards, just be careful, you know, you're entitled to your views and everything else, but at the minute things are quite, you know, heated in the media. And they said, what are you worried about us for? We're not interested in that, and we don't care, and don't be putting it on. So they were no more interested in that political sort of stuff that was going on. They were more interested in meeting new people and whatever, and they felt that I was maybe superimposing the media and stuff onto them when they weren't consulted at all. I was just delighted. I was just delighted that it wasn't on their radar.
Yeah. I spoke to someone else. This is what our research department does, and they described you as a very brave head teacher, and some of what you just said gives explanation to the comment that you're not frightened of taking chances and thinking outside of the immediate task in front of you and planning for the future. But more importantly, or as important, we've talked about the pupils that you supervise and look after. The same person said, this is a quotation from them, they said that teachers are trained, good teachers are born, and that you have an ability to bring the best out of the staff wherever you may find them. How important of a task is that for you?
Well, I think it's very important to bring all of the staff with you. And from that, so for example, last year, the year before last, we were shortlisted for the UK School of the Year. And we went to the big event in London. I think it was a place where the footballers have their awards. And I took the caretaker, I took the supervisor who was 80, Granny Whitewell, you call her, from the Whitewell Road. We took teaching assistants, we took teaching staff. For me, staff is everybody. And it's really important to have a very inclusive, equitable staff. That wouldn't be everyone's style of leadership, but I suppose for me that's based on your values. And I always think of my mother-in-law, who is just probably one of the greatest women that I know, worked in the Royal as a cleaner for I think 35 years. She would describe it on occasion as a floor beautician. And her values around people, kindness, family, all of that, as well as my own and other people that have helped me, have influenced me. And I always think if she was in work and someone was derogatory towards her because she was a cleaner or spoke, you know, and didn't include her, that would really hurt me. So I suppose my values are shaped by the people around me. And I think it's so important to garnish a team around you and to focus. I mean, we do quite a lot in the places I'm in around staff wellbeing. And I think that's really, really important, because at times it can be overwhelming and people can have different challenges, but anything that's applied is applied to the whole staff. And I suppose that's my values from my daddy, from my Aunt Claire, from all of the people that have brought me up. I obviously there's decisions as a principal that you need to make involving other things that require that level of hierarchy and formalization. But in terms of children and in terms of staff, I think the children are really need to be at the heart of what we do. And for example, when I started the new school, I would have met students every week for lunch, and it wouldn't have been the brightest students. It would have been a combination. And I said, right, how are we getting on? What are we doing well? What do we need to be doing better? What's not happening? What are you not seeing? Now, that wasn't naming any teachers, but that was just saying, what's the climate like? What's it like to be a student? So for me, I would be very focused on the student experience, and on always being on a level where we know if we're not getting it right. And to move, years ago, I think when you were a teacher, people would have been very autocratic and would have, shouted, and that's not my style. And I think, the key to students moving forward is relationships. I think relationships with staff, relationships with students, relationships with parents, that underpins everything that you do. And if they're not good and the environment's not safe and it's not positive with the students, the other stuff won't happen. Or if it happens, it'll be through a forced way or not really the right way. So for me, relationships has to underpin everything that you do.
There's a story. I'm going to tell this quickly because we're rapidly running out of time. But there's a story told about a certain British civil servant who came to talk to you, and he asked you what the secret of your success was, and you said, "I'm just ordinary. I'm just ordinary. That's what I do." And then the same person you met at a later stage, and what did he ask you then?
He says, "Are you still being ordinary?" And I says, "I'm trying my best." But I have found when I be myself, and I don't put on a persona around a very superficial head teacher, I have got on well with, I've met obviously people in the Department of Education and some politicians and all that. And I genuinely believe people prefer authenticity. They prefer to deal with people. They prefer to deal with people on a human level. And if you're, I just always be afraid of not being true to my own values. And our family are very quick at calling you out if they think that you're, like, one day, you're talking about Kieran and Gabrielle and Harry. One day I came home late, was rushing into the kitchen. I could hear this laughing from the living room. And when I went in, our Harry was buckled over laughing and tears were tripping him. And I thought, what's going on? I went on. And as he moved back, I could see the TV and I was on it and they had me paused. And they were all like, he says, "We're laughing at you." And I was like, I don't even find this funny. So I just went straight into the kitchen. So they're very good. My family and my sisters are very good at praising you and telling you that they're proud of you and all of that. But they all participate in different walks of life as well. And I think it's really, really important that they're able to say, I'm proud of my sister, not because she's a head teacher, but because she's a decent human being, because she's a nice person, because she's a bit of humility about her, not because she parades about the place. You know what I mean? If someone comes into our school sometimes, I would never say, if they're walking in and they're looking for something, I'd say, "Yes, just over there," whatever. I like to say, I'm the principal of the school, but I'm not ashamed of it. I don't mean it that way, but I just think, your title doesn't make you, it's your actions, and it doesn't, it doesn't make you a better person by the title. So sometimes I do end up in the media and in lots of things, but it's not that I'm pushing myself for me. It's because I either want something for the school, or I think, somebody needs to be advocating for the young people, or I think there's something that needs to be said.
We've talked a lot about your awards, both in basketball and in education and the schools that you've been involved in, and very proud of the schools that you've been involved in. And I have to say, they're very proud of you, and they've all spoke very highly of you. The mountain, which we touched on very briefly, and Kieran's love and your love for the mountain. I know recently there was some, I'm not sure the word is controversy, but the word, well, taking it for granted, and you had been involved to try and regulate, for instance, car parking, where cars were parked and local people couldn't get delivery of oils and all of that. How precious is the mountain to you?
I love the mountain, and it's a privilege to live on it. And what I love about it is that it's a mountain for people, and I think it's one of the best resources locally, and that's why I'm loving that potentially from, you know, the Upper Springfield, they're going to have an area which they can access, and also from where we are. So in terms of, I have no issue with people using it and the amount of people using it, and I think that that's really important. But the problem has been that the popularity has escalated so much that it has caused significant problems. So you're talking about Kieran there. He was on 2 24-hour shifts over Christmas and came back, drove up to come home, and took him an hour to get less than half a mile. And he was like, "More, I can't cope. I'm already going to work." And, you know, so it has become very, very popular. And as a result, not with intent, people have come from near and far. So we worked with statutory organisations, and they're looking at putting some interim, because the last thing I would want is for it not to be used. But at one point it was becoming, I mean, there was, from Boxing Day on, there was no potential to get any sort of emergency services up to our house. They just wouldn't have got up. So it's more about securing that for the residents, and then putting, I suppose, longer terms in place that will facilitate access to it, because I think it's one of the greatest resources, and it's gorgeous. I mean, we would see the sun setting and the sun rising, and you think to yourself that you're nearly in a different country. So, I mean, I feel very lucky to live where I live. Kids don't always think that, but now that Harry can drive, he loves it. Gabrielle's sort of in between, so she would be down on her granny's in Arizona Street quite a bit, because she finds it the up and down thing. But I think it's only really, I suppose, 9 minutes or 10 minutes from all of the sport and shopping and everything else. So it's handy.
My daughter and 3 grandchildren and my son-in-law live on the mountain, and they're just in love with it. It's just, and just as you're saying about sunrises and sunset and taking photographs of the snow and sending them to me to look at and all of that. But it is something that we can't take for granted. And it is something that we all, whether we're walkers, whether we're drivers, we all have to be mindful that the mountain has to be protected. So we've been talking for almost an hour. And I want to ask you 2 questions. And I promised you I wouldn't ask you any trick questions, but I'm going to break that promise. So through all of the interviews that I've looked at and through this conversation, as an individual, as a person, you're very much a part of. And what I mean by that is you talk about the village that reared you. You talk about the friendship of basketball. You talk about the solidarity of teaching, and that solidarity is extended to the pupils as well as the cleaners and the caretakers and all of that. How do we get a village? How do we get a village round? How did you do it, or how should we do it?
Well, for me, what has helped me, I mean, I think I've been very lucky with the people that I've had. I don't know how you get people around you, but for me, wherever I go, I always try to include people and reach out to people who I know will help me, and they know it's a reciprocal relationship. I mean, my daddy's a close friend from back in the day. Dennis Maloney, I don't know if you know Dennis, he's a sister. Yeah. And Dennis and I have he's been one of the constants, as well as my Aunt Clet and Uncle Jimmy and Groyd, but he's been a constant, and I always, when I move, I keep in contact with people that I know and bring them up to the school and try and just keep those connections there, because I think once people realize that they can also help you and that those relationships are reciprocal, then that leads, and I also think you can get people around you in a village around you by being honest, by also showing that that you're totally normal, that you have the same experiences, that you have bad days like everybody else, that you have a roller coaster, that your life isn't perfect, that that everything isn't always plain sailing, and I think when you can be vulnerable around people and they can see that you are totally normal, just like them, then there's a gravitation there. And I also think having a good sense of humor. Like, I find myself funny, the kids don't, but I also, the kids in the house I'm talking about, but I also think you have to be able to laugh at yourself, and you have to be able to, like, you know, have fun through the dark days. Like, our vice principal was leaving there to go to another school, and like, all we did was play music. You know, the show must go on, and he's a big GA man, so we were playing, you know, in the club. Nothing really matters because he's all in the club. So, you know, I think having a good sense of humor, being able to laugh at yourself, being able to learn from your mistakes, all of that helps. And I think not being afraid to ask for help, you know, because if you're constantly going through life and school and everything else, and you don't reach out to people, you don't show any vulnerability, everybody thinks that you've got this, then why would they engage in conversations with you? Because from their perception, everything's going all right, you know?
Well, here's the last question, and I'm going to let you go back to, and I know you've taken time out to have this conversation. You know that wee girl that lived off the Glen Road that wouldn't do her homework, when she was put upstairs, came back down again, and had her daddy wrapped around her wee finger. So she was marking this woman now that I'm speaking to out of 10. How would you say she has done?
An 8. There's always room for improvement. I think there's always room for improvement, and those villages and those people are very good at telling you and keeping you right.
Listen, I couldn't finish on a better quotation. And maybe we'll do some stage, we'll get some of your pupils on and we'll do an interview with them. And
that would be lovely.
We'll look at it from another perspective. For taking time out and for being my guest, a great guest, I have to say. You're a great conversationalist. Thank you. And thank you for all of the stuff that you've done. And congratulations. I didn't mention a quarter of the citations and awards and all of that. And I didn't mention it because we wouldn't have got talking about anything else. So listen, thank you. And we'll look forward to talking to your students.
All right, thank you.
See you then.